I followed my wife as she went out with her friends and witnessed her and another man together. What I saw that night changed my life forever. What was supposed to be a simple casual encounter between women turned into a brutal revelation, a cold, cutting blow that tore at my soul. There she was, my wife, my companion, my wife, sitting at a table in a luxurious restaurant, laughing, touching a stranger's hand, leaning into him with a sparkle in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years. A glow that wasn't mine. A glow I would never see directed at me again. My stomach twisted, my hands sweated, my chest rose and fell in a frantic rhythm, as if my heart was trying to escape what my eyes were witnessing. But I couldn't look away. Like a masochist who becomes addicted to his own pain, I continued to watch the spectacle of betrayal unfold before me. Her touch on his arm, the way she tossed her hair to the side, the way her lips formed a seductive smile that I thought was mine alone. And then, the final blow. He held her face gently, as if holding something precious. And she closed her eyes and gave in to a kiss. A kiss that wasn't mine. My breath caught in my throat. Anger burned inside me like an uncontrollable fire, but with it came something worse, despair. I was losing my grip on reality. How could that be happening? How could the woman who said she loved me, who slept in my bed, who shared my life, be there, with another man, as if I had never existed? I took out my cell phone with shaking hands and took a photo. The click of the camera sounded like a sentence. The proof was there, indisputable. The betrayal, immortalized on my phone screen. I took a deep breath. There wouldn't be a scandal there. No, I wouldn't stoop to her level. But I needed to see her sink into her own lie. I needed to confront her. I needed to destroy her in the same way she destroyed me at that moment. I drove home with my hands clenched on the steering wheel, my mind racing with the words I would say. I could feel my heart beating in my chest like a war drum. I wanted revenge. I wanted to look into her eyes as her lies crumbled around me. I wanted to see the panic on her face when I threw the naked truth in front of her. But most of all, I wanted to understand. Why? What did I do to deserve this? What led my wife to cheat on me? Where did I go wrong? I entered the house without making any noise. The night was dark and silent, as if the universe had shrunk in anticipation of what was about to happen. Every step I took echoed on the wooden floor, carrying a weight that wasn't physical, but emotional. And then, there she was, on the couch, with a calm face, using her cell phone as if her life were absolutely normal. As if she hadn't just stabbed me in the back. As if she hadn't just destroyed everything we built together. She looked at me and smiled. My God, that smile. False, liar, rotten. A smile that once brought me peace now disgusted me. I sat in front of him, my expression cold, holding the cell phone tightly, feeling the heat of hatred pulsing through my veins. She noticed something wrong. His brow furrowed slightly. What's wrong? He asked, his voice carrying a hint of mock concern. I took a deep breath. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. I wanted to explode. But instead, I slid the phone across the table. The screen is on. The photo there, exposed, like a fatal blow. She looked at the image and, in that instant, I saw the color drain from her face. His eyes widened, his hands shook slightly. Panic took over his expression. What is this? His voice trailed off. I laughed. A cold, humorless laugh. You tell me, I replied. The silence between us was suffocating. I could hear my own breathing, heavy, uncontrolled. She tried to speak, her mouth opened and closed a few times, as if searching for words that simply didn't exist. I can explain, he whispered. I slammed my hand on the table. Explain what? My voice was serious, full of venom. Explain how you made a fool of me this whole time. Explain how you pretended to love me while giving yourself to someone else. Explain how you turned our marriage into a farce. She swallowed hard, tears gathering in her eyes. It's not what it seems, he tried to argue, his voice shaky, desperate. I hit the table again. Isn't it what it seems? My voice boomed across the room. You want to tell me what this feels like then? Because to me it feels like exactly what it is, a betrayal. A damn betrayal. She started to cry, tears streaming down her face, her hands shaking trying to hold the photo. I made a mistake, I know I made a mistake. But I still love you, I swear I love you. Those words hit me like a knife. What did she know about love? How could I talk about love after everything? You don't love me, I whispered, my voice broken, thick with pain. If you loved me, this would never have happened. Silence fell upon us again. She was crying softly, her shoulders shaking, her hands clutching the hem of her dress as if that would stop her from completely falling apart. But I didn't feel sorry. I felt nothing but disgust. What hurt me was not just the betrayal, but the certainty that I could never trust anyone I blindly trusted again. That he could never look at her the same way again. That everything we built was ruined forever. But it wasn't over yet. I thought I had all the answers. I thought I understood what was happening. But I was wrong. Very wrong. What I didn't know was that that night still held a revelation that I could never have predicted. A detail that would change everything. A detail that would make that betrayal even more repulsive. I thought I had seen it all. But the truth was much worse than I imagined. Welcome to the channel where the truth about betrayal is exposed without censorship. Here, we do not support, we do not justify, and we never romanticize infidelity. The stories you will hear are fictional, but they reflect the impact real and devastating what betrayal does to people's lives. These are lessons of pain, consequences and twists that show that every action has a price. Get ready. The story you are about to hear is shocking, intense, and full of unexpected revelations. Listen carefully, because some truths are hard to swallow. Night fell slowly over the city, staining the skies with orange and lilac tones, while the lights of the buildings slowly came on, reflecting on the streets wet from the light drizzle of early evening. Traffic followed its usual flow, cars rushing, impatient horns honking, people walking hurriedly along the sidewalks, wrapped up in their own worlds and concerns. Inside a spacious, well-lit apartment, a house that exuded the comfort built over years, Thomas closed the door with a tired sigh. The smell of floral perfume that permeated the room indicated that Olivia had already passed by, as she always did before going out to dinner with her friends. The silence of the house immediately enveloped him, a stark contrast to the hustle and bustle that normally surrounded them during the weekends, when they entertained friends or simply enjoyed each other's company. But Thursdays were like that now. Olivia went out religiously with her friends and he used the time alone to relax, have a whiskey or simply watch something without having to negotiate the remote control. In the first years of marriage, he didn't mind these outings, but lately, the frequency had increased, and with it, the uncomfortable feeling of distance between the two. He dropped his keys on the living room table and loosened his tie, his shoulders feeling heavy after a long day of work. Their marriage had never been perfect, but it had always been solid. At least that's what he thought. Thomas met Olivia during college. She was vibrant, full of life, with a look that always carried a hint of challenge, as if she was constantly seeking a new adventure. He, more rational, more reserved, was always enchanted by this energy she carried. She was the kind of woman who turned an ordinary day into something memorable just by being there. They fell in love quickly and, despite their differences, they balanced each other in a way that made sense. He was structure, she was impulse. He planned, she lived in the moment. At first, this dynamic brought them together in an almost magnetic way, but as the years went by, small fissures began to form. Nothing glaring, nothing alarming. Just subtle changes, little details that he, deep down, preferred to ignore. Olivia was never the type to like routine. I liked experimenting, meeting people, always being on the move. Even after marriage, she never became the homely wife, and Thomas accepted this because part of her charm was just this freedom of spirit. But lately, he noticed that conversations were shorter, that kisses before bed were too quick, that looks took less time connected than before. He felt it, but never commented on it. Maybe because I was afraid of the answer, maybe because I believed it was just a phase. After all couples went through moments like this. But this phase had lasted too long. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and walked out onto the porch, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. The cool night wind brought with it a melancholy that he tried to ignore, but it settled in his chest anyway. He looked at his cell phone and opened the conversation with Olivia. No messages from early on. Normally, she would send at least a "good evening" or an "I've arrived." But today, silence. Something in him twisted, but he forced himself not to entertain unnecessary thoughts. He picked up the remote control, but found nothing to hold it. Restlessness took over him, a growing discomfort, as if his own instinct was trying to tell him something he refused to hear. Olivia, on the other hand, was living in a completely different moment. Sitting at a table surrounded by glasses of wine and laughter, she would throw her head back laughing at any joke. Her eyes shone, and for a moment, she looked like a younger version of herself, as if time had regressed, as if she were once again in that phase where life was full of possibilities, without strings attached, without demands. Since she started going out more often, she felt renewed. I loved Thomas, of course I did. But marriage had become predictable, an endless cycle of repetitions, of hasty kisses, of conversations about bills and responsibilities. There were days when I missed the euphoria of the first years, the butterflies in my stomach, the feeling of newness. She looked around the table, her friends chattering about their marriages, about children, about everyday problems. Some happy, others not so much. Some complained about their husbands as if they were an unavoidable burden. Olivia didn't see herself like that. She didn't complain about Thomas. He was a good man, a caring, hard-working husband. But something inside her screamed for more. While Olivia enjoyed the night, Thomas tried to ignore the restlessness that was growing inside him. I walked around the house, running my fingers over the picture frames on the bookshelf, looking at photos of trips, of happy moments, trying to remember when was the last time they took a new photo together. He couldn't remember. Time passed and details were lost, small lapses that, individually, seemed harmless, but together told a story of gradual separation. He sat on the couch, running his hands through his hair, feeling an unknown weight. He picked up his cell phone again. No messages. Olivia said goodbye to her friends, walking out of the restaurant with a satisfied smile on her lips. She felt light, carefree. Her phone vibrated in her bag, and when she pulled it out, she saw Thomas's name on the screen. For a brief second, he hesitated. I didn't want him to ruin that moment. He took a deep breath and answered, trying to keep his voice natural. Hey love. Still awake? Thomas hesitated on the other end of the line. His voice came out deeper than he intended. Yes. Are you still at dinner? She looked around, seeing her friends walking away to their cars. Yes, I was leaving now. The silence that came after was unusual. He wanted to ask something. She felt it. But instead, he just heard a short, "Okay, take care." Something inside her tightened. Why did that simple answer bother her so much? Thomas hung up the phone and threw it next to the couch. He felt a bitter taste in his mouth, discomfort in his chest. He didn't know exactly what was wrong. But I knew something was there. Something big. Something he still couldn't name. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. It wasn't time to face the truth yet. Not yet. But soon, there would be no more running away. The weeks dragged by in a strange rhythm, a broken rhythm of routine and uncertainty. Thomas noticed the changes in Olivia's habits like someone watching a crack slowly spread in a wall before giving way for good. Small details that once seemed insignificant now became glaring evidence that something wasn't right. She started going out more often, responding to messages with an unusual delay, smiling at the phone in a way he hadn't seen in a long time. At first, he tried to ignore it. He convinced himself that it was just his head playing tricks, the result of the wear and tear of marriage, of time, of the familiarity that so often transformed the extraordinary into the ordinary. But something inside him couldn't accept it. A primitive instinct, a sharp intuition that hammered in his mind and made him question everything he thought he knew about his wife. The nights they spent together became increasingly distant. Before, even without much to say, they shared the same space with comfortable tranquility, shared meals, watched television, exchanged glances that needed no words. Now, Olivia always seemed rushed, distracted, with her eyes constantly lost in some invisible spot he couldn't reach. When she kissed him, he felt that there was no longer any heat, just the mechanical coldness of a gesture that had become automatic. Thomas tried to start a conversation, tried to bring her back, but he always received empty answers, rehearsed excuses about tiredness, about work, about nothing that really justified the growing distance between the two. It was one night, as she was preparing to leave once again, that the restlessness within him reached a breaking point. He watched as she finished getting ready, adjusting her dress with a delicacy that she no longer used when they were together. The perfume she chose was strong, provocative, different from the ones she usually wore. Her cell phone vibrated on her dresser, a quick notification that she tried to ignore, but Thomas noticed. He didn't ask. I didn't want to give her the chance to make up a lie. He just watched, taking in every detail, feeling a mixture of anger and frustration bubbling up inside him. When Olivia left, Thomas sat for a long time, trying to convince himself that there was still room for doubt. But there wasn't. Something inside him already knew the truth. All that was missing was the proof. He grabbed his car keys, ignoring the pressure on his chest that tried to hold him down on the couch. He drove off without a defined plan, just with the impulse to follow, to see with his own eyes what he already felt in his gut. It didn't take long to find her. The restaurant was one of the most sophisticated in the city, the kind of place they used to go to together on birthdays or special occasions. Now, Olivia was there without him, sitting at a table away, lit by soft candlelight. But she was not alone. Thomas's heart slowed and quickened at the same time, a jarring beat between disbelief and despair. He saw her laugh, throw her hair back, hold the hand of the man in front of her as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The touch was intimate, familiar. The way she tilted her face at him, the way her lips curved into a smile that Thomas recognized so well, all of it confirmed what he didn't want to accept. Her every movement, every look, every gesture with that man left no doubt. She betrayed him. She deceived him, not just with words, but with her own body, with the affection that was once his alone and now belonged to another. Thomas's breathing became ragged, the weight of the moment crushing his chest. He took out his cell phone with shaking hands, his mind in shock, recording the scene as if he needed proof to believe what was happening. The photo was clear enough that there was no room for misinterpretation. Should he confront her right then and there? Make a fuss, pull her away from that table and demand explanations? But something held him back. An instinct for preservation perhaps, or the desire to see how far she would go. Olivia didn't seem worried, she didn't look around to check if she was being watched. It was as if his betrayal was something natural, as if he, Thomas, was no longer part of the equation. He stayed there for a time he couldn't measure, watching the spectacle of his own failure, absorbing the scene like an impotent witness to his own misfortune. When he saw the man cup Olivia's face and lean in to kiss her, something inside him broke once and for all. There were no more doubts, no more room for rationalizations. She was there, in the arms of another, without hesitation, without apparent guilt, as if their love had never existed. Thomas felt the bitter taste of betrayal rising in his throat, a mix of disgust, pain and a silent fury that made his blood boil. Without waiting any longer, he turned and left, each step heavy as lead. He got into the car and drove aimlessly, his thoughts spiraling, his mind torn between happy memories and the brutal reality he had just witnessed. He wanted to scream, he wanted to break something, he wanted to escape to a place where that scene didn't exist. But there was no way to escape. Olivia's betrayal was real. And now, he needed to decide what he would do with this truth. Thomas didn't sleep that night. The weight of the discovery crushed him, and his mind spiraled into dark thoughts. Olivia's face, the way she smiled at that man, the way she looked at him with admiration and desire, all of it replayed in his mind like a disturbing movie that he couldn't escape. The clock beside his bed said 3 a.m. when he stood up, unable to remain still. The silence in the house seemed denser than ever, suffocating, filled with a tension that only he felt. He walked around the room, his eyes sweeping the space filled with memories of a marriage that now seemed like a lie. The sofa where they had already lain together on so many lazy nights, the table where they shared dinners and conversations, the photos spread across the shelves, portraits of a past that, at that moment, was nothing more than a well-staged theater. Every detail of the house seemed to mock him, reminding him that everything he thought was solid had crumbled. When Olivia walked through the door a few hours later, her heels clicking on the wooden floor, Thomas didn't move a muscle. Sitting in the armchair, he held his cell phone in his hands, his eyes fixed on the screen where the photo of the betrayal was shining. Olivia hesitated when she saw him there, a flash of surprise and discomfort crossing her face, but she recovered quickly, forcing a smile as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "Still awake?" "I thought you were already asleep," he said, taking off his coat and dropping his bag on the table. Thomas didn't respond immediately, just slowly raised his eyes, studying her as if he were seeing a stranger. She seemed unconcerned, but there was a hint of nervousness in the way she avoided his gaze for a long time, as if she sensed something was wrong. He took a deep breath, holding back the anger that threatened to boil over. "Where have you been?" he asked, his voice low, controlled, but filled with something dark that made Olivia stop for a moment before answering. "With the girls, you know, as always," she murmured, taking off her earrings and walking towards the bedroom. "I'm going to take a shower and be right back," he added, trying to end the subject before it even started. But Thomas didn't allow it. "Don't lie to me." Olivia froze for a brief second, her body stiffening before she turned to face him. The mask he was trying to support began to crack. "What are you talking about?" she asked, forcing a nervous laugh, crossing her arms as if that would protect her from the truth that was about to be thrown at her. Thomas stood up slowly, each movement calculated, holding his cell phone steady before turning the screen toward him. The photo appeared, clear, indisputable. The air between the two became heavy, almost palpable. Olivia couldn't hide her shock. His eyes widened for a moment before looking away, as if the mere sight of the image burned his skin. He tried to open his mouth, perhaps to deny it, perhaps to make up an excuse, but nothing came out. Thomas smiled, a cold smile, devoid of any joy. "Then," he insisted, his voice low but sharp as a blade. "Nothing to say?" Olivia licked her lips, breathing unevenly. "I desperately tried to find a way out, a way to mend something that was already broken." "Thomas, please, it's not what it seems," he said, his voice almost pleading, but he laughed, a short, incredulous laugh. "Isn't that what it looks like?" he repeated, taking a step forward. "So explain to me what exactly it looks like, because to me it looks like my wife, the woman I loved, was having dinner with another man, laughing, holding his hand and, in the end, indulging in a kiss that was supposed to be mine." He watched as she blinked rapidly, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. But at that moment, he didn't want her tears. He wanted the truth. "Who is he, Olivia?" he pressed, fists clenched at his sides. "How long has this been going on?" She hesitated. Every second of silence only further fueled the storm within him. "It doesn't mean anything," he murmured, finally. It was a mistake. Thomas snorted, shaking his head. A mistake, he repeated, his voice filled with contempt. Funny, because it didn't seem like a mistake when you smiled at him. When you let him hold your hand. When you kissed him like he was the center of your universe. Olivia closed her eyes, her shoulders slumping. I didn't want it to be like this, he whispered. I didn't want to hurt you. He felt the burst of anger rising like fire through his veins. But it hurt, he replied, his voice full of pain. And the worst thing of all, Olivia, is that you did it without even hesitating. You betrayed me while I was here, living for the two of us, thinking we still had something. You destroyed everything. She approached, her eyes shining with a mix of guilt and despair. I still love you, Thomas, I said, and he laughed, a bitter laugh, without any humor. Do you love it? He repeated, his cold eyes fixed on her. Because, for me, that's not what love is. Olivia cupped his face in her hands, as if to convince him that her words still had weight. I didn't plan this. I felt alone, I lost myself. But that doesn't mean I don't love you, she insisted, and Thomas pushed her away, as if his touch burned her skin. 2. Don't try to justify what you did. Because in the end, it doesn't matter the reason, it doesn't matter the excuse. You made a choice. The silence that followed was overwhelming. Olivia was crying, but Thomas felt nothing but overwhelming emptiness. Then, suddenly, something in her eyes changed. A real fear arose there, mixed with guilt. She took a deep breath, her lips trembling, as if she needed to find the courage to say something that hadn't yet been said. There's one more thing you need to know, he murmured, and Thomas felt the tension in the air intensify. The pain of betrayal was enough to destroy him. But the expression on his face indicated that there was something worse. Something he didn't know yet. He narrowed his eyes, feeling his stomach drop. What is it, Olivia? He asked, his patience hanging by a thread. She opened her mouth but hesitated. He swallowed hard, looked away, tightened his grip on his arms as if he needed to hold on. And then, finally, he blurted it out. He's married, Thomas, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but the weight of his words fell on him like a punch to the gut. The shock paralyzed him for a moment, but before he could react, she continued, guilt spilling over every word. And his wife found out. And now, she wants to talk to you. Thomas remained still for a long moment, Olivia's words hanging in the air like a sharp blade about to pierce him. He blinked a few times, processing what he had just heard, feeling a bitter taste in his mouth, a lump forming in his throat. His chest rose and fell in an uncontrolled rhythm, and he realized he was holding his breath. The idea that there was someone else involved in this nightmare, another victim of the same lie, made his mind spin. The betrayal in itself was devastating, but now, he was forced to face a new element, something he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just his life that had been destroyed. Another woman, another wife, was also facing the same hell. Olivia watched him with a mixture of guilt and apprehension, her gaze fleeting, her fingers gripping her arm tightly. She knew there was no justification for what she had done, knew that any attempt to sugarcoat the truth would ring hollow and false. But now, the problem went beyond the two of them. She wants to talk to you, he repeated, his voice shaking slightly, and Thomas let out a short, humorless laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. And what exactly does she want to tell me, Olivia? That her husband cheated on her too? That she also feels betrayed? What else is there to say that isn't already obvious? His voice was filled with anger and irony, but deep down, there was something deeper, a contained despair, a desire to understand where it all started, how it had gotten to this point. Olivia took a deep breath, trying to find the right words, but anything she said would sound absurd. She just wants to talk. He said we need to meet in person. She wants you to know something. Thomas narrowed his eyes, jaw clenched, feeling his stomach drop. And do you know what it is? Olivia looked away, biting her bottom lip, a clear sign of hesitation. I don't know for sure. All I know is that she looked different. I wasn't just angry. I was determined. Thomas ran his hands through his hair, feeling tiredness weighing down his shoulders. The emotional exhaustion, the confusion, the anger, everything mixed inside him, creating a whirlwind of feelings that he didn't know how to contain. Should he just ignore it? Pretend there wasn't another piece to this puzzle that he didn't even know existed? But something inside him wouldn't let him move forward without answers. He needed to know. The following night, Thomas left the house without saying where he was going. Olivia watched him leave without daring to ask. She knew he would find her. And he knew that anything that happened from then on was out of his control. The address sent to him took him to a discreet cafe, away from the center, a place where couples used to meet for intimate conversations, away from the prying eyes of the city. He walked in, feeling the weight of tension on his shoulders, and his eyes soon found a woman sitting in the corner, her arms crossed on the table, her gaze fixed on the cup of coffee in front of her. She seemed lost in thought, but when she saw him, she looked up, an unreadable expression crossing her face. Thomas walked slowly to the table and stood in front of it. Are you his wife? He asked, bluntly, and she nodded, indicating the chair in front of her. Yes. My name is Emily, she said, her voice firm, but with a hint of exhaustion that he recognized immediately. It was the tone of someone who has spent sleepless nights, who has had their world turned upside down without warning. Thomas sat down, watching her carefully. She was beautiful, with delicate features, but there was something dark in her eyes. Something that made him feel a shiver run down his spine. Why did you want to meet me? He asked, without patience for beating around the bush. Emily intertwined her fingers on the table, took a deep breath, and then looked straight into his eyes. Because I found out about cheating in a way you wouldn't imagine. And because, there's something you need to know about your marriage. Thomas frowned, feeling uneasiness rising within him. What are you talking about? Emily leaned forward slightly, her voice lower, carrying something he couldn't identify. I followed my husband. Just like you followed your wife. I saw the two of them together before either of us confronted them. But that's not all I discovered. Thomas felt his breathing quicken, the discomfort growing with her every word. Emily continued, her expression becoming even more serious. I went after his past. I wanted to understand how long this had been happening. I wanted to know if there were other women besides your wife. She paused for a moment, letting her words sink into Thomas's mind. And that's how I found something that made me come to you. The silence between them was almost suffocating. Thomas felt the tension pulsing in the air, every fiber of his body prepared for a revelation he knew he wouldn't like. Emily pulled the bag to her side and took out an envelope. Read it, he said, sliding the envelope across the table. This changes everything. Thomas hesitated for a second before taking the envelope. His hands shook slightly as he tore off the edge and pulled out what was inside. His gaze darted across the pages, and with each line he read, his vision seemed to darken. The air was knocked from his lungs. What was before him was impossible. A direct blow to the center of your soul. He looked up slowly, his mind refusing to accept. But Emily already expected that reaction. She knew what was written there. He knew Thomas could never predict what he was about to face. Now you understand, don't you? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't just a betrayal, Thomas. It was much worse than that. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. My God, he murmured, feeling a chill creeping up his spine. He thought he had already felt all the pain he could bear. But I was wrong. The truth was far worse than he could have ever imagined. Thomas felt the paper trembling between his fingers, the weight of the revelation still crushing his chest. The words before him seemed to jumble together, even though he knew exactly what was written there. Each line carried a devastating truth, a cruel blow that went beyond betrayal, beyond the pain of infidelity. Emily watched him in silence, her expression firm, but there was something in her eyes that indicated that, like him, she was also being destroyed inside. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to contain the avalanche of feelings that overwhelmed him, but there was no way. My stomach turned, the air seemed thicker, too heavy to breathe. When he finally found the strength to speak, his voice was low, almost hoarse, filled with disbelief and anger. This can't be true, he said, but there was no conviction in his words. Emily let out a heavy sigh, crossing her arms as if trying to protect herself from the pain she herself was carrying. I wish it weren't, he replied, his voice controlled, but with a shadow of deep weariness. But I checked everything, looked for evidence, asked questions, and it all leads to the same place. Thomas ran his hands over his face, feeling his skin burn, as if he were feverish. The shock still didn't let him process it completely, but the rational part of his mind was starting to put the pieces together. He looked at the papers again, rereading the information, the records, the documents that confirmed the worst-case scenario. His wife hadn't just cheated on him. She had cheated on him with a man who was already part of her life in a way he would never have imagined. Olivia's lover, the man she cheated on him with, had a connection with him even before the betrayal. This man, this stranger who snuck into her wedding, wasn't just an opportunist or some random stranger. He was someone who, in a way, already orbited his life without him knowing. He swallowed hard, feeling the bitter taste of reality settling in his mouth. Emily continued, her voice lower, as if each word was a sharp blade. They started longer ago than we realize. It wasn't a mistake, Thomas. It was a continuous, repeated, planned choice. He felt his jaw muscles tighten, anger rising in his throat like an explosion waiting to happen. Every detail that previously seemed unimportant now made sense. The moments when Olivia was distant, the subtle changes in her behavior, the way she avoided certain topics or lost conversation when he asked simple questions. Everything was there, hidden in plain sight, and he, blinded by love and trust, hadn't seen it. The betrayal was unbearable in itself. But now, there was something much worse behind it. Something that made him question everything, from the first day of their relationship until that very moment. He felt like his entire life had been built on a lie. His heart was beating painfully, and adrenaline coursed through his veins like an uncontrolled electrical current. He didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to react. What do you do when you find out that the woman you loved was capable of something so dirty? How do you deal with the fact that the man she cheated on you with was not just a stranger, but someone whose involvement went beyond the limits of what he considered bearable? Emily remained silent for a few moments, allowing him to take it all in. Thomas felt the weight of the truth crushing him, but at the same time, something inside him was stirring, an almost visceral need for revenge, for justice, for making Olivia and her lover pay for what they did. But how? How could he recover from something so devastating? He could confront them, expose everything, scream until his voice broke. I could just turn away and let them wallow in their own choices. He could look for ways to slowly destroy them, as they had destroyed him. But nothing seemed enough. Nothing seemed capable of healing the damage done. Emily studied him, as if she could see exactly the gears of his mind turning at full speed. "What are you going to do now?" he asked, his voice sounding less like curiosity and more like challenge. Thomas looked up at her, and for a moment, something inside him calmed. Not because he felt peace, but because, for the first time in days, he saw someone who completely understood his pain. Emily wasn't just another victim. She was an essential piece of his story now. Somehow, they were linked by this betrayal, by this deep wound they both carried. And maybe, together, they could find a way to deal with it. He took a deep breath before responding. "I still don't know," he admitted, his voice filled with conflicting emotions. Emily nodded slowly, as if she had already expected that answer. "Me either." A dense silence fell between them, but this time, it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was a shared silence, a space where they could both exist without having to explain their pain. Thomas knew that no matter what he decided to do, nothing would be the same as before. He couldn't just go home and pretend nothing happened. He couldn't continue his life as if that revelation hadn't changed every cell of his being. Something inside him had changed forever. He picked up the papers again, staring at them as if they could give him all the answers he needed. But there was no answer there. Just facts. Just the raw, cruel truth. Emily watched him, and for a moment, something passed through her eyes, a flash of understanding, of empathy. "If you need me for anything, I'll be here," he said, and Thomas didn't know what to say. Because deep down, he knew that she was the only person in the world who could understand what he was feeling. And maybe, just maybe, he needed her more than he realized. Thomas felt time distort around him, the minutes dragging by as if the universe had slowed down just to prolong his suffering. He left the cafe without exchanging any more words with Emily, just a short wave and a look full of meanings that they both understood without needing to verbalize. He walked through the streets without a defined destination, trying to organize his thoughts, trying to find some logic in what he had just discovered. But there was no logic. Just betrayal, just deceit, just a dull pain that throbbed in his chest as if his soul had been ripped out and left behind a void that was impossible to fill. The city lights seemed colder, the unfamiliar faces passing by were just unimportant figures. His phone vibrated in his pocket, and he didn't need to look to know it was Olivia. Since leaving the house that night, she had called him several times, probably desperate to know how he would react, trying to measure the damage she had caused. But he wouldn't answer. Not now. Maybe never again. He continued walking, feeling the weight of silence crush him. With each step, memories appeared in his mind without him calling them out. Moments shared, laughs exchanged, dinners, trips, plans for the future that were now nothing more than ashes. How could someone who claimed to love destroy everything like that? How could someone who shared a life with another person just throw it all away, without remorse, without hesitation? His car was parked near the cafe, but he didn't want to get into it yet. He felt that if he went to his house at that moment, something inside him could explode irreversibly. I needed to think. I needed to decide what to do. Olivia had betrayed him, that was a fact. But what really tore him apart was knowing that this betrayal hadn't just been a slip-up or a moment of weakness. There was something much deeper behind it. Olivia's lover wasn't just a stranger, he wasn't just someone who came into her life by chance. No. He was already part of their story before Thomas even knew he existed. Betrayal wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice that involved layers and layers of lies, of manipulations that he could never have imagined. Emily had said that after finding out everything, her husband tried to minimize it, tried to convince her that it meant nothing, that it was a mistake that would not be repeated. But how can you believe someone who has built a parallel relationship for so long? How can you believe anything said by someone who spent months, perhaps years, hiding a secret life? Thomas knew that Olivia would also try to convince him, that she would come with empty promises, with tears and rehearsed excuses, but none of that mattered anymore. He didn't need fake repentance. He needed justice. Something that would make that weight inside him dissipate. After a time that he couldn't measure, he finally decided to return home. He drove in silence, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel tightly. When he parked in the garage, he saw the house lights on, and movement near the window indicated that Olivia was waiting for him. He entered without haste, each step echoing through the hallway as if he were entering a courtroom where his life would be judged. Olivia was there, sitting on the couch, her eyes red and puffy, her cell phone next to her, indicating that she had tried to call once again. When he saw him, he stood up immediately, as if he had been waiting for this chance. "Thomas," he began, his voice hesitant, filled with a fragility that would have previously disarmed him. But not now. Now, all he saw was a woman who was no longer the same woman he once knew. He remained standing, arms crossed, expression impassive, waiting for her to speak. Olivia took a step forward, as if she wanted to close the distance between them, but hesitated when she saw that he didn't react. "You found Emily, didn't you?" he asked, and the answer was obvious. Thomas just nodded, saying nothing. Olivia ran her hands through her hair, trying to find the right words, but anything she said would sound like an insult to his own intelligence. "I don't know what she told you, but please listen to me. I know I hurt you, I know I made a mistake, but that doesn't mean I don't love you. It never meant I didn't love you." Thomas laughed softly, a bitter, disbelieving laugh. "Funny how you keep saying that, even after everything," he replied, his voice full of sarcasm. "Because from what I saw, from what I read, you did much more than just betray me. You deceived me, you deceived her, you built a web of lies that even you may not be able to fully understand." Olivia opened her mouth, but then closed it, as if she wasn't sure how to respond. He continued. "And you know what's worse, Olivia? It's not just the fact that you cheated on me. It's not just the fact that you chose him. That's what it means. That's how long it lasted. It's what you did behind my back while I thought we were happy." She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "I never wanted to hurt you," he whispered, and he took a step forward, getting just close enough for her to feel the force of his words. "But it hurt," he said, his voice low, controlled, but filled with deep pain. "And now, there is no going back. There is nothing you can say that will erase what happened." The silence between them was piercing. Olivia ran her hands over her face, as if trying to wipe away not just the tears, but all the guilt that was consuming her. But there was no escaping it. She knew that now. "What are you going to do?" he asked, his voice breaking, and Thomas took a deep breath, feeling the final decision solidify within him. He looked around, at the house they built together, at the objects that carried memories of a marriage that was now dead. Then, without looking away from her, he spoke the words that would seal her fate. "I'm leaving, Olivia. And you will deal with the consequences of what you did." Her expression fell into pure despair, but he no longer felt anything. The pain, the anger, everything was beginning to be replaced by something more powerful. The certainty that he would never look back. Thomas closed the door behind him for the last time, feeling the weight of the decision fall on his shoulders like an anchor finally released at the bottom of the ocean. He didn't look back. "I didn't need it anymore." The house that had once been her home was now nothing more than a tomb of memories, a space where every wall, every piece of furniture, every object carried traces of a love that no longer existed. He walked to the car without haste, without hesitation. The pain was still there, but something inside him had changed. It was as if, when he walked through that door, he had left behind the version of himself that believed in Olivia's promises, that searched for meaning where there were only lies. Now he was a different man. A man who finally understood that sometimes, the only way to win was to just walk away. As he drove, he felt his mind finally begin to calm down, as if his soul, after so long suffocated by the weight of betrayal, was beginning to breathe again. He didn't know exactly where he was going, he just knew he needed to get away. The phone vibrated on the dashboard, and he already knew who it was. Olivia had called so many times he'd lost count. There was nothing more to be said. Nothing she could say would change what happened. But even so, as if it were a final proof that there was nothing left to recover, he answered. The silence on the other side lasted only a few seconds before her voice filled the space between them. "Thomas, please listen to me," I said, and he remained silent, waiting. "I know you hate me now, I know nothing I say will fix this, but you need to understand that I didn't do it to hurt you," he continued, and he laughed, a cold laugh, without any trace of humor. "But it hurt," he replied, his voice firm, without any trace of the fragility he had carried in the last few days. "And now, it's over." Olivia sobbed on the other end of the line, trying to speak, trying to convince him of something that no longer made sense, but he didn't wait. He just hung up, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over him. As Olivia broke down in tears in the house that now seemed too empty, Thomas felt that, for the first time in a long time, he was in control of his own life. He no longer needed answers. I didn't need to understand why Olivia did what she did. Some people simply choose to destroy what they have, and he would no longer be the victim of that destruction. He knew that eventually she would try to follow him, try to beg for a second chance, but he had already made his decision. And that decision was final. The following days were silent. Emily got in touch a few times, but not to talk about the betrayal or the traumas they shared. Their conversations were about starting over, about how two broken people could help each other find a way back to something still worthwhile. Thomas wasn't sure where this would lead him, but he knew that, of all the people in the world, Emily was the only one who could understand what he felt. They met a few times, talked about their pain, about their lives before the chaos, and somehow, without realizing it, they began to rebuild together. Meanwhile, Olivia faced the consequences of her choices. The man she destroyed her marriage for was now gone too. His lover's wife had taken drastic measures, exposing the betrayal publicly, causing him to lose much more than he expected. He tried to turn the situation around, he tried to make things right with his own family, but it was too late. With no way out, he disappeared, leaving Olivia alone, staring at the wreckage of what was left of her life. She tried to find comfort in friends, but many turned away, unable to ignore what she had done. Her job became an unbearable place, the judgmental looks, the whispers, the way everyone seemed to know she had thrown it all away. In the end, all that was left was the silence of a house that was once full of love, but was now nothing more than a constant reminder of her choices. Thomas moved on. The divorce process was quick and hassle-free. He wanted nothing more than his freedom, and Olivia knew she had no right to argue. As he signed the papers, he felt something inside him finally release. The past had been closed. Now, all that mattered was the future. And the future, to his surprise, came in an unexpected way. He and Emily continued to see each other, not as two survivors of the same disaster, but as two people who had learned to trust each other. What started as conversations about shared pain turned into something more. Something real. Something neither of them expected, but which made sense. For the first time in a long time, Thomas felt like he could breathe without feeling a crushing weight on his chest. He didn't know where this would go, but he knew that, with her, for the first time, he had a chance to start over. The betrayal had destroyed a part of his life, but it hadn't destroyed him. And that was what really mattered. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments what you thought of this story. What was the most shocking part for you? What would you do in Thomas's place? I want to know your opinion. If you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now and activate the bell to receive more stories like this. Remember, this channel does not support any type of cheating. Here, we show the consequences and the pain it causes. Until the next story.